3 weeks after my neighborhood HOA filled in a drainage ditch behind my house to build a tennis court, raw sewage flooded 18 basements. And I'm not talking about a little backup. I mean black water, thick, toxic, the kind that changes how you smell a place forever. The worst part is, I told them exactly what would happen, down to the week, and they laughed like I was some paranoid guy with a shovel and too much time on his hands. My name's Daniel Reeves, I'm 32, and I design wastewater systems for a living, which, in hindsight, made the whole thing feel less like a mistake and more like watching a slow-motion train wreck you weren't allowed to stop. I moved into Red Hollow Estates just outside Charlotte in late 2018, back when the market wasn't completely insane yet, and I remember thinking I'd gotten lucky. Decent price, quiet street, older subdivision with mature trees, the kind of place where people still wave when you drive by. The only thing that stood out, and not in a good way, was this ugly drainage trench running behind my property, about 10 feet across, maybe 5 feet deep, choked with weeds, broken branches, the occasional trash bag someone had tossed over a fence like it would just disappear on its own. It looked like something the neighborhood forgot about on purpose. First weekend I moved in, I was out there clearing some of the overgrowth, just trying to make it less of an eyesore, when my neighbor, Mrs. Langley, leaned over the fence with her coffee and said, "You can clean it all you want, honey, but that ditch isn't going anywhere." I asked her what she meant, and she just shrugged, said, "It's been there since the 90s. HOA's been trying to get rid of it for years, but the county won't let them." That caught my attention, not because of the HOA part, but because of the county part. Governments don't usually care about ugly ditches unless they do something important. That night, curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled the subdivision plat from the county records website, zoomed in on my lot, and there it was in plain black ink. Septic easement, 10 feet, running exactly where that ditch sat. I remember leaning back in my chair and just kind of laughing under my breath, because suddenly it all made sense. That wasn't a drainage ditch. It was the main dispersal channel for 30 individual septic systems. Every house on our side of the neighborhood fed into that easement one way or another. It wasn't pretty, but it was doing a job that nobody wanted to think about. Once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. Every time I walked my dog past it, every time it rained and water pooled and slowly drained out, I wasn't looking at weeds anymore. I was looking at flow capacity, soil absorption rates, bacterial breakdown. It was a system, a crude one, sure, but functional, and more importantly, legally protected. You don't just fill something like that in because it looks bad on a brochure. But the HOA, they saw something else entirely. To them, that ditch was a liability, an embarrassment, the one thing keeping Red Hollow from being the kind of neighborhood they could brag about at open houses. And leading that charge was a guy named Richard Holbrook, HOA president, late 50s, always in pressed polos, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He had this way of talking where everything sounded like a sales pitch, even when he was just asking you how your weekend was. I met him properly about 6 months after moving in, at one of those quarterly HOA meetings they hold in the clubhouse that smells faintly like chlorine and burnt coffee. He shook my hand a little too firmly, asked what I did for work, and when I told him I was in environmental engineering, specifically wastewater design, I swear I saw something flicker across his face. Not interest, exactly, more like calculation. At the time, I didn't think much of it. That meeting is where he first brought up the idea. He dimmed the lights, pulled up this glossy rendering on a projector, bright green court, white lines, a couple of people mid-serve, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. "A community tennis court," he said, pacing slowly like he was unveiling a new product. "Right here, behind lots 14 through 22. Which, of course, included mine. People started murmuring, some excited, some skeptical, and then he dropped the line he'd clearly practiced. "This could increase property values by up to 15%. That got them. You could feel the room shift. Suddenly it wasn't about a ditch anymore. It was about equity, investment, status. I raised my hand, waited until he acknowledged me, and said, as calmly as I could, "That area is a septic easement. You can't just build over it." He smiled, that same tight smile, and said, "We've looked into it, Daniel, but I appreciate your concern." The way he said my name, like we were on the same team, rubbed me the wrong way. So I pushed a little harder. "I don't think you understand," I said. "That ditch isn't decorative. It's handling waste flow from about 30 systems. If you block it, you're going to create a backup. It's not a maybe, it's a win. A few heads turned toward me then, and I could feel that shift again, but in the opposite direction, uncertainty creeping in. Richard chuckled, actually chuckled, like I just made a joke. And you're basing that on? He asked. I held his gaze and said, my job. I design these systems. There was a pause, just a second, where I thought maybe, finally, he'd take it seriously. Instead, he waved a hand dismissively. We've consulted with professionals, he said. Land development experts. They didn't raise any such concerns. I remember leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms, and thinking, land development experts. That could mean anything from a civil engineer to a guy who installs sod. After the meeting, a couple of neighbors came up to me, asking if it was really that serious, and I told them the truth. Yeah, it was. Not immediately catastrophic, maybe, but give it a few weeks, a heavy rain, increased usage, and the system would start to fail. Waste has to go somewhere. If you block the path, it doesn't just disappear. Mrs. Langley found me on my driveway the next day and said, you think they'll actually do it? I looked past her fence at that overgrown ditch, at the way it dipped and curved out of sight, and said, if they think it'll make them money. Yeah, I think they will. A week later, the HOA sent out the official vote notice. 7 board members, 2 opposed, motion approved. Construction to begin immediately. That night, I pulled the plat again, printed it out, highlighted the easement in red, and drafted a certified letter to Richard and the board, citing county code, environmental regulations, everything I could think of that might slow them down. I wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. I was trying to stop something I knew was going to hurt people. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of engines, heavy ones. And that's when I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They were racing me. By the time I stepped out onto my back porch with a cup of coffee I didn't even remember making, there were already 2 dump trucks idling behind the tree line, and a yellow excavator chewing into the edge of that ditch like it had something personal against it. Dirt flying, roots snapping, that low grinding sound of metal and hydraulics that you feel in your chest more than you hear. And standing off to the side, hands on his hips like a man supervising his dream coming to life, was Richard Holbrook. I didn't even bother putting on proper shoes, just walked straight out there across the damp grass, still in socks, probably looking half crazy, but I didn't care. I waved down the guy operating the excavator, got him to pause, and asked who authorized this. He pointed, of course, to Richard. So I walked over, holding the rolled-up plat in my hand like it was some kind of shield. Richard, I said, trying to keep my voice level, you got my letter. He barely glanced at it. I did, he said, calm as ever. And I responded. Yeah, he had. An email. 3 lines. We appreciate your input. Please refrain from spreading unnecessary concern within the community. I unrolled the paper right there, held it up between us. This is a legally protected septic easement, I said. County code. You can't alter it without approval, and even if you could, you'd need to redesign the entire wastewater flow for this section of the neighborhood. He sighed, like I was the inconvenience here. Daniel, we've been over this. We consulted a contractor. They assured us this is just a drainage feature, not critical infrastructure. I actually laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so far off it almost felt unreal. A contractor? What kind of contractor? He hesitated for half a second, just enough for me to catch it. Landscaping, he said. And there it was, that moment where you realize you're not dealing with ignorance anymore. You're dealing with willful blindness. He didn't want to be right. He wanted to win. You're about to bury the only outlet for 30 septic systems, I said, a little louder now. You don't need a landscaper, you need an engineer. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. What I need, he said, is for you to stop undermining this board. People are excited about this project. Property values matter. And what do you think happens to property values when people have sewage in their basements? I shot back. He didn't answer that. Just turned, waved at the operator, and the machine roared back to life. That was the moment I knew talking wasn't going to fix this. So I shifted gears. That afternoon, I documented everything, photos of the excavation, timestamps, copies of the plat, the meeting minutes showing I voted against it. I put together a package and sent it registered mail to the regional environmental office, not because I expected them to show up immediately, but because I wanted a paper trail. If this went bad, I needed it on record that someone had raised the alarm before the damage was done. Meanwhile, the construction didn't slow down. If anything, it sped up. Over the next week, I counted at least 40 truckloads of filled dirt dumped into that ditch, packed down layer by layer until what used to be a channel was now just gone. Flat. Clean. Like it had never existed. Neighbors would stop by, watching from their fences, some of them excited, already talking about weekend matches, kids learning tennis, neighborhood tournaments. Others quieter, glancing at me like they weren't sure who to believe anymore. I didn't push it. I'd said my piece. At that point, all I could do was wait. By early September, they were pouring concrete, smooth, bright, pristine, the kind of surface that photographs well for listing photos. Richard sent out another email, full of exclamation points this time. Progress is ahead of schedule. Community enhancement. Grand opening coming soon. And for a few days, everything seemed fine. That's the dangerous part about systems like this. They don't fail instantly. They absorb the shock, hold the pressure, buy you just enough time to think maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. Then September 14th hit. Heavy rain overnight. Not a storm exactly, but steady, soaking, the kind that saturates the ground and fills every pore of soil until it can't take another drop. I remember standing at my kitchen window that morning, watching water pool where the ditch used to be, except now it had nowhere to go. It just sat there, creeping outward. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Mark Jensen, 2 houses down, voice tight, like he was trying not to panic. "Hey, man, you know anything about plumbing?" he asked. "Some," I said. "Why?" "My basement drain's backing up," he said. "Like, really backing up." I closed my eyes for a second. "Is it clear water?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "No." I grabbed my boots and headed over. The smell hit before I even got to his door, that unmistakable, sour, heavy odor that clings to the back of your throat. Inside, it was worse. Dark water bubbling up from the floor drain, spreading across the concrete, carrying debris with it, toilet paper, sludge, things you don't want to identify. Mark just stood there, hands on his head. "What the hell is this?" he kept saying. I didn't sugarcoat it. "It's sewage," I said. "And it's not just yours." By that evening, 3 more houses reported the same thing. Then 5. Then 8. Group texts lit up, people posting pictures, asking questions, blaming pipes, blaming the city. Anything but the one thing sitting right there in the middle of the neighborhood, gleaming under fresh paint. Richard sent out a message saying they'd hired a plumber, that it was likely a localized issue. Nothing to worry about. The plumber showed up the next morning, took one look at the situation, and I swear this guy didn't even bother pretending. He stood in the middle of the street, hands on his hips, looked at that brand new tennis court, then at the line of houses with hoses running out of their basements, and said, loud enough for a small crowd to hear, "Which one of you geniuses filled in the septic easement?" No one answered. He shook his head. "I can clear a clog," he said. "I can replace a pipe. But I can't fix physics. You blocked the outflow. This stuff's got nowhere to go." That's when the panic really set in. By September 22nd, 18 homes were affected. 18. Some worse than others, but all dealing with the same nightmare. Contaminated basements, ruined furniture, the constant, lingering smell that no amount of bleach seems to erase. One family had a 2-year-old who developed a rash after playing on the floor before they realized what was coming up through the drains. That one spread through the neighborhood faster than anything else. Fear does that. And through all of it, Richard kept trying to control the narrative. Emails about ongoing investigations, third-party assessments, phrases that sound official but don't actually mean anything when your house smells like a sewage plant. I stayed quiet publicly, but behind the scenes, I kept documenting, updating the file I'd already sent out, adding photos, testimonies, timelines. Because at that point, it wasn't about being right anymore. It was about making sure this didn't get buried along with that ditch. Then, on September 29th, a line of white trucks rolled into Red Hollow Estates, and everything changed. Not contractors, not plumbers, federal. The trucks didn't come in loud or dramatic. No sirens, no flashing lights, just slow, deliberate, like they already knew exactly where they were going and what they were about to find. White SUVs, government plates, doors opening in sync, and then people stepping out in full protective gear, gloves, masks, sealed boots. You don't see that in a quiet suburban neighborhood unless something has gone very, very wrong. By the time I walked down to the entrance, half the street was already gathered there, standing in that uneasy semicircle people form when nobody wants to be the first to ask the question out loud. One of the agents, a woman with a clipboard tucked under her arm, asked who the HOA president was. And for the first time since all this started, Richard didn't step forward right away. He did eventually, of course, straightening his shirt, forcing that same practiced smile, but it didn't land the same anymore. Not with the smell in the air, not with people watching him the way they were now. "I'm Richard Holbrook," he said. "Can I help you?" The woman nodded once. "We're here regarding a reported environmental contamination issue tied to septic system failure," she said, calm, clinical. "We'll need access to the affected areas and any documentation related to recent land modification." I saw his jaw tighten just a little. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," he started, but she didn't even engage with that. Just turned to her team and said, "Let's begin sampling." And that was it. Control shifted in an instant. Over the next few hours, they moved through the neighborhood like a process that had been rehearsed 100 times, collecting soil samples, testing water, photographing everything. They didn't rush, didn't speculate, just documented. I stayed mostly in the background, but at one point, the same woman approached me. "Daniel Reeves?" she asked. I nodded. "We received your submission," she said. "The plat, the meeting minutes." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So you know what this is," I said. She gave a small, almost sympathetic nod. "We have a strong indication," she replied. "Now we confirm." 3 days later, the confirmation came back, and it hit like a hammer. E. coli levels off the charts. We're talking 15,000 colony-forming units per 100 milliliters in some samples. The safe threshold is under 1. Not 10, not 101. This wasn't a minor issue. It was a full-blown contamination event. The official notice went up at the entrance that same week. Environmental hazard, restricted area. Big, bold lettering. The kind that makes potential buyers slow down and then keep driving. And then came the meeting. Emergency HOA gathering. Packed room. No polite chatter this time. Just anger simmering under the surface. Richard stood at the front again, but he looked smaller somehow, like the room had grown around him. He started with a statement. "We are cooperating fully with authorities. We are exploring remediation options." All the usual language. Someone in the back cut him off. "My basement is full of sewage," a man shouted. "My kids can't even go down there." "What exactly are you cooperating with?" Another voice jumped in. "You told us this would raise property values." That's when it broke. People talking over each other, pointing, accusing, and for the first time, Richard didn't have control of the room. He tried to respond, tried to regain that polished tone, but it kept slipping. "You ignored a professional," someone yelled, gesturing toward me. "He told you this would happen." Richard looked at me then, really looked, and there was something there. Not quite regret, not quite anger, more like realization coming too late to matter. The lawsuit started within a week. 28 families filed together, remediation costs, property damage, health impacts. The numbers stacked up fast, over $1 million for cleanup alone, hundreds of thousands more to restore the easement they'd buried like it was nothing. The HOA reserves? 60,000. Not even close. Lawyers got involved. Insurance companies started asking questions. And suddenly, all those confident decisions from a month ago were being picked apart line by line, email by email. Richard tried to hold it together at first, but you could see it unraveling. The confident emails stopped. The meetings got shorter. Then one day, word spread that he'd filed for personal bankruptcy. A couple weeks after that, someone mentioned his wife had moved out. Not long after, I saw him driving for a rideshare service. Same press polo, but no audience anymore. And me? I was in a strange position. Because I had voted against the project, because my objections were documented, the plaintiff's attorneys made it clear I wasn't part of the liability. Zero exposure. Clean separation. On paper, I was just another homeowner who'd been ignored. But living there, it didn't feel like a win. Monthly HOA fees jumped from $80 to $650 just to cover legal costs and emergency measures. Houses started going up for sale, then sitting and sitting. Who wants to buy into an active contamination site? I held on for a few months, long enough to watch the neighborhood change from what it had been, quiet, stable, into something tense, uncertain, every conversation circling back to the same question. How bad is it really? Eventually, I made a decision. I sold to a distressed property investor, took the hit, and got out. And then something happened that, even now, feels a little surreal. The same agency that had shown up in hazmat suits, they called me, said they needed someone familiar with the original layout, someone who understood wastewater flow, soil absorption, system design. Offered me a contract to oversee part of the remediation process. $180 an hour for 100 billable hours, $72,000 to help fix the exact problem I'd warned them about from the start. I remember hanging up the phone and just sitting there for a minute, not sure whether to laugh or shake my head. There's a kind of irony that doesn't feel satisfying, just heavy. 5 years have passed since then. Red Hollow Estate still exists, technically, but it's not the same place. 18 homes never recovered their value, some never sold at all. Prices that once hovered around $500,000 dropped below $100,000 in some cases. And that sign at the entrance? It's still there, maybe a little faded now, but readable. Environmental hazard. I drive by sometimes, not often, just enough to remind myself how quickly things can go sideways when people stop listening and start assuming. The house I live in now, it's nothing fancy, but it's connected to the city sewer. No septic tanks, no easements running through backyards, no HOA meetings about community enhancements. Just pipes that go where they're supposed to go, out of sight, out of mind, the way infrastructure works best. I used that $72,000 as a down payment. Clean slate. But I still think about that first meeting sometimes. The rendering on the screen, the promise of higher property values, the way a room full of people chose what sounded good over what was actually true. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were in that room, would you have believed me or him? And more importantly, do you actually know what's running underneath your own home right now? Because I promise you, it matters a lot more than how things look on the surface. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you want to hear what happened when the contamination notices started showing up in Richard's own driveway, yeah, that's a whole story on its own. Hit subscribe.